We're going to get to experience some massive changes for Diablo 4 this week, with the PTR releasing today. I wanted to give a brief summary of some of the changes that you're going to see people testing out this week, as well as share some of the changes that I'm most excited to test out myself. Alright, so to keep things simple, I'm just going to quickly run through the massive changes to itemization, some of the different changes and additions to the endgame activities. There's also a bunch of changes to the different classes in the game. I'm not going to go through each one of the changes. I'm just going to point out a couple of the updates that stuck out to me. You're also going to see this symbol appear throughout the video. This just shows what my favorite changes from the patch were, just in case you're curious. We're going to start off with some of the general changes that are coming to itemization. First off, they are reducing the amount of affixes that can be found in the affix pool. This just means they got rid of all of those damage on Tuesday type of stats. They're also reducing the number of affixes that can be found on items. This now means that legendaries can be found with 3 affixes on them, while rares will only have 2. There's also just going to be less item drops in general. All of this should just result in there being less clutter, you spending less time sorting through your stash. Whenever you are sorting through your stash, it should mean you're sorting through more impactful items. Next up, we get some actual crafting in the form of tempering. Basically, what tempering does is allow you to add 2 additional affixes onto a piece of gear, meaning that a fully upgraded piece of gear will have 5 affixes on it. You'll be able to add these affixes with things called tempering manuals, which you'll just find randomly as you're playing. Interesting note on tempering, the affixes on these tempering manuals seem to be more unique than what naturally drops on gear. The manuals include things like additional skill size and additional projectiles. We haven't seen a lot of these yet, so I'm excited to see what sort of affixes will be on these tempering manuals. They're also adding something called greater affixes to the item chase. Items can now drop with increased values of affixes. This can happen to multiple affixes on one item. For example, this item has rolled with 2 greater affixes. This is also indicated by a Roman numeral when an item has dropped, showing the amount of greater affixes that are on that item. This can only happen to dropped items, however, so you can't re-roll a greater affix into a different greater affix, and you can't re-roll a basic affix into a greater one. The final step to getting your perfect item in the endgame is called Masterworking. This replaces what was previously the blacksmith upgrading. The way this works is there are now 12 upgrade ranks, and every 4 ranks a single affix gets crit. This just means that it gets a larger increase than all of the other affixes. They're also finally changing how the codex system works. All legendary powers are now going to be stored in the codex. When you salvage a legendary item, it is automatically going to upgrade the codex's base value. This means once you find a max legendary power and you salvage it, you'll be able to take that directly from the codex and imprint it an unlimited amount of times. This is going to free up a ton of stash space, especially for people who like trying multiple builds throughout the season. I used to save every max aspect I found, as I didn't know which ones I was going to use later on for a build, so this is going to free up a ton of stash space for me. Moving on to the changes to the endgame activities. First up with Helltide, this is basically just going to function like Blood Tides from Season 2, but Hell-themed. If you didn't experience Season 2, it just means that Helltides are now going to have more density and more activities within the zone, which is hopefully going to make it a lot more interesting. They're also adding a new endgame activity called the Pit. If you've played Diablo 3, this is basically just going to be greater rifts. It's an activity that will scale seemingly infinitely, and this is where you're going to collect your materials for Masterworking, as well as summoning materials for Tormented Echoes. Tormented Echoes is a new boss update. So first off, we're getting a new boss called Endariel. This has the same drop table as Duriel, so a new way to get Uber uniques. All bosses can also now be summoned at level 200 for an increased challenge as well as increased reward. And this is what those summoning materials for Tormented Echoes is. Moving on to the class updates. There's a lot of really good class changes in this patch, but I'm not going to cover every single one of them. I'm just going to cover a couple of the different new items or skill updates that stood out to me and some of just the general shifts within inside each class. For barbs, Charge and Hammer of the Ancients are receiving nerfs. Hammer of the Ancients seemingly being more so effective than Charge is. But for buff skills, Call of the Ancients and Double Swing / Dust Devils seem to be getting the most love, with multiple different upgrades to old aspects and getting new aspects as well. Druids are getting some needed early game buffs, with Shred receiving an aspect that gives you Spirit on kill, so hopefully that'll make that a good leveling build. Minions as a whole are also getting buffed this patch, so maybe there'll be a companion druid. Probably not in the end game, but might be something to test. If you want minions though, Necros are the big winners this patch. Minions seem like they're going to be really good with all of the different buffs they're receiving. Necros also got some speed, with Blood Mist having its movement speed reduction removed, as well as gaining some additional speed on top of that with an aspect for Blood Mist. So great news for Necros. For rogues, the thing that stood out the most to me was Flurry, which is getting an interesting unique that looks like it's going to pair really nice with all of the different grenade buffs that rogues are getting this season. Another skill to point out is Barrage. It's already really good. It's getting another aspect that's going to buff it some more, so Barrage is still on the upswing as well. For upgrades to Sorcerers, immediately a Frozen Orb Conjuration build comes to mind. They showed off that new unique that makes Frozen Orbs spawn Conjurations, and those Conjurations shoot more Frozen Orbs, which looks really fun. The chaining of skills like this is something that sounds really interesting to me, and I hope they do more of it in the future. But speaking of those chaining skills, they also added another unique for Sorcerer that makes fire bolts split into 4 whenever they're fired through a firewall. So again, having these 2 different skills interact to change the way the skill functions is something that I think is really cool, and I'm excited to test. All in all, this patch has so many good things going for it. The item chase they've added is going to add so much enjoyment to the game, at least for me, I think it will. But let me know what your favorite changes from this patch were, and if you're going to be playing the PTR. And if you are, hopefully I'll see you there.